Hello, welcome to Skills-Based Health on Demand, brought to you by MOSHAPE and Missouri Healthy Schools and DESE. We are happy today to bring you the third video in our National Health Standards series on accessing valid and reliable resources. I am Kim Goforth. I am up at the Columbia Public School District, and I am the K-12 Health and PE Coordinator, and I am joined by the best in the West, Mr. Brad.
Hey everybody, my name is Brad Brummel and I'm the Health and PE Coordinator for Springfield Public Schools.
Great, good to see you today, Brad. We're going to jump right in. Here's our learning objectives for today's session. We're going to dig into the components of Standard 3. We're going to look at the performance indicators and what mastery means for those indicators. And then we're going to take some time to work through some instructional planning and practice opportunities for your students surrounding a performance indicator for Standard 3. So to help us on our journey today, we've prepped a training guide for you. And so you can access this training guide in the YouTube description. And that link, you can either download it, and there are fillable boxes for you to use, or you can print it, whatever your learning preference is there. But this training guide will help us through this entire session today. So Brad, let's dig into Standard 3.
Let's do it. Standard 3 is access valid and reliable resources. It's all about helping students demonstrate the ability to access, be able to find that valid information or product or service, ultimately to enhance their health. And I think it's important to clarify valid. And so when we talk about valid, we're talking about a source of information that is being offered, that's offering correct information by a trusted source or person. And so this is what Standard 3 is all about. I think that this is a skill that can help any content area, but certainly when we're trying to improve our health and make those health-enhancing behaviors. So we have 3 goals for Standard 3. For accessing valid and reliable resources, goal number 1 is all about when these products, services, and information is needed. So we're trying to develop the awareness of knowing when we need this health product, or when we need this service, or when we need this specific information related to our health. And so you can see some examples down here below that would fall under that category of goal number 1. Goal number 2 would be all about how do I locate and use this valid and reliable resource or information? So can I find it? Is it free? And how do I use it? And again, you can see some examples here. Goal number 3 is all about, okay, I've found the information or I've used the information. Now it's my ability to be able to analyze and evaluate, is this valid? Is this coming from a trusted resource? Is this, what's the purpose of this person sharing it with me? It's all about the validity. And this is one of the harder things to teach students, but it's very important when it comes down to them being independent and empowering their own health and well-being. So again, some examples, some classroom examples for this goal.
Great, that's a perfect breakdown because this particular standard can feel very big. And so that breakdown of the goals needs to kind of partner in your brain with the overall goals of health education. And so when we look at these goals that have been put out by both Shape America, RMC Health, when we focus on goals of health education, how does this standard partner? How does it marry well with these overall goals? And so if we talk about it from a planning perspective, when I look at the standard and I say, why is this important? Why do we want kids to master this standard? I think about things like, I want them to be able to critically analyze any information that comes at them regarding health. And I know this year in COVID, boy, we've had a lot of health information coming at us. And so I want students to be able to critically look at that and then either accept that information or reject it based on all of the skills that they'll learn in here, based on reliable information and valid information. So that's a connection I have in my brain to these overall health education goals. And so we want you to take a minute now to reflect on your space, on your district, on your classroom, on your students, and how do you see the goals of health education being met through this standard 3 on accessing valid and reliable information. So we've got part in your training guide here on page 1. Make that connection for yourself. If you want to take some reflective time, pause the video. We challenge you to do that now.
And Kim, I think for those teachers that are making the shift from a content-based to a skills-based, I think the fear is, well, if I don't teach my students this long-term effect or short-term effect of this specific drug or this specific health information, how, you know, what could come of that? And I think that this is one of the standards that really we can lean heavily on as a skills-based health education teacher is I am teaching my students and empowering my students to be able to find that information on their own, because most of them have access to phone and internet. And we should be teaching strategies that aren't related to the internet as well. But this is one that I think we can really lean on if you're feeling insecure in making that shift from content-based to skills-based.
Right,
so
absolutely, good point.
So moving into our vertical grade level progression, here you can see what this standard and skill looks like from a pre-K through a graduate. And so you can see that at the primary stages, we're learning about trusted adults and being able to identify who they are in their life. We're then progressing to understanding what valid means and what that looks like in a resource. And then as we get into middle school health education, we are really starting to focus on analyzing those resources. And then as we are getting into high school, we're really pushing our students to be able to use these resources to, most importantly, maintain and enhance their health. And I think this is key how it adds it here, and the health of others. So can our students make a difference in their families and their friends, their peers, and their community? So we're just going to take a quick look at the performance indicators. You can, you'll get a chance here to dive deeper and explore your grade span here in a second. But I just wanted to take a second. We always try to look at maybe the difference in some verbs here. And so if you look at performance indicator 1, you'll see the verb analyze. And then if we go to high school, you'll see evaluate. So you see a little difference in the verb. Other than that, they're pretty similar. I think the other thing that I'll notice is that another difference is the high school, you're going to see them using the resources more, but pretty similar. I think that 3.12.2 use resources from home, school, and community. I mean, that describes it pretty well of what we're wanting our high school students to be able to do. But just kind of a quick glance at the performance indicators.
Perfect. So as the viewer thinks about your district or your space, like Brad did, look at some of your grade span verbs. So we challenge you right now to make it personal. So go into your grade span, look at some of those verbs, and then partner that with what you're experiencing in your district. Maybe what is an area that you think I could really use this standard to push into my students, get them these skills, and maybe this could start your thinking in maybe some cross-curricular things. Like Brad said, this is a skill that's really good for any content area, but for your health education, start to identify your performance indicator that you would like to look at. And so we've got a part here in your training guide on page 2 that we'd like you to take some time. Again, pause the video if you need to and find your grade span and select something that's near and dear to your district and your students. So take a minute to do that. Now we're going to start with a little conversation about backwards design. Brad and I have such a curriculum brain. We always like this visual and start with backwards design. So when we look at our kids over here on the left, we want them to run through our skills-based health class. We run across the finish line. So when we start backwards, we start with those goals of health education that we opened our session with. And so then right before the finish line, we need to focus on our standards. And so that's what we are doing here in this training series. So we have talked about our standards, the performance indicators, and then we back up a step and focus on our assessment. What are our students having to master in this standard with the skills? And so that's where we're going to take just a minute to look at what does an assessment need to look like for this standard. So what are some mastery items that come out of standard 3? And then we'll talk in just a minute about the next steps, the last steps in our planning for instruction and practice. So mastery of standard 3.
So what I wanted to do first was just show you some examples of middle school performance indicators within this standard and what student-friendly language could look like for a performance indicator in standard 3. So for example, if we look at 3.8.1, describe situations that may require professional health services, student-friendly language and mastery could look like, I can determine when I need help and or information. So we're just breaking down that performance indicator. These statements can help us with our planning and our rubrics and our assessments. And so an example of what an assessment tool could look like for us as teachers to find out, have my students mastered this skill? This is pulled from the RMC Health Skill Guide, but have our students write about a situation in their life where they needed help. Students need to answer the following questions, and we got a list of questions here that students could answer. And then when you as a teacher are reviewing these answers, you will be able to find out if my students have mastered indicator 3.8.4. And so this is just one example of what mastery could look like. It doesn't have to be an end of unit quiz. We should be measuring if our students are progressing and mastering these skills as our learning is happening, not after the learning.
Great, perfect. And on that note, Brad, I think when this standard uses verbs like use and locate, it's not going to be a multiple choice question if you're actually having to watch them use and find these resources. And so that's why an end of unit assessment doesn't play nice with this type of verb. So we're going to give you another chance here to pause and think about the performance indicator that you have selected for your particular district and students, and really look at these students to do. What do you want to see your students doing to show you mastery of your performance indicator that you have selected? So take a minute here and think about what your students will be doing and reflect that in your training guide on page 2. And then here's our friendly visual again of backwards design. So we have just chunked through the goals, our standards and performance indicators. We've talked a little bit about the to-dos for your assessment. And now we're going to get into the grit of, as a teacher, how do I plan some instruction and practice opportunities for my students to show this mastery of standard 3. So here we are at the end, the purple and yellow of our backwards design model.
So as a teacher, when we're planning our instruction, and anytime we're hoping to help our students learn and acquire a new skill, it's always helpful if we can break this skill down into steps. And so one thing we love about RMC Health Skill Guides is that they break each standard down into steps for our students to learn and master. And so here you can see a middle school step-by-step of what it would look like for them to master this skill. Again, step 1. We've kind of talked about these focuses already, but just starting with identifying when I need help or when I need this information. And you can see the step-by-step process ending with being able to reflect and learn from that. And so here you see the high school example, very similar, being able to evaluate, being able to locate, and then a big one on high school is to be able to make a plan to be able to access it when they need it, because we can't wait until we need something to learn about it. We probably need to have a plan in place when we are in high school and we're getting to that age where we need to be able to advocate for our own health. And again, that reflect stage is always important. So these should really be guiding our instruction and our practice opportunities as we're diving deep into our instruction. What tips would you have, Kim?
Right. This is such a fun one, again, because you can use it across the content areas. But I think some important tips that you will find in some of the RMC Health skill guides are checklists. And so when students access a piece of health information, there are some really student-friendly, teacher-friendly checklists that they can evaluate. Is this valid? Is this reliable? And so I challenge teachers to really use those checklists. They're provided for us. If it's not broke, let's not try to fix it. So they are there, very handy. And I think another connecting piece, I think, for students to hear from teachers is to say, how can they go use this in other health settings? Where else will they be engaging with health information? It's not just going to be in your classroom. They may go to the nurse's office. How can they apply some of those skills there? Or when they go to their own doctor's office, the dentist office. So how are they making those connections out into other areas where they're going to receive health information? So I think making those purposeful connections for students would also be a tip that they could put into their instructional practice there.
Thank you, Kim.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to go through just some examples of what some of the instruction could look like, some of the practice opportunities could look like for a couple of the steps. So for example, this is step 1. This is pulled straight from the RMC Health Skill Guide. You see some guiding questions, some example valuable vocabulary, and we're starting with performance indicator 3.8.4, and we're trying to help them understand when they need help and information. And so a couple practice opportunities involved with this, and this is obviously step 1 that we just reviewed, would be give them the opportunity to journal. It seems like a very simple, it should be part of a health educator's just routine. I think that this is not just something to do during standard 3, but this should be like a normal routine of your classroom. But some prompts during this part of learning where they're getting to write about opportunities when they needed help in the past. If they're a middle school student, maybe reflecting and brainstorming about when are some times where I may need help as a high school student, and getting them to think about that next stage of life, or as a high school student going into college. And then anytime you can put our students into scenarios, that is always a good learning opportunity, makes it relevant, and they could do that for this step as well. Mm-hmm. So step 2, as we're helping students analyze the validity of health and information, I think one of the keys is to have students reflect on when they're in the situation of looking for information or resources. Did I seek this information, or did the information find me? So did this information come to me on a YouTube ad or commercial, or did someone tell me that with an alternative motive, or was I the person that went out and sought this information? Because that makes a big difference as we are analyzing the validity. And so you see some valuable vocabulary, again, some great guiding questions, but here we're going to give students an opportunity to practice using a checklist. Like Kim mentioned before, here's an example of one, and you can find it in the resource bank. But a student could easily use this checklist to kind of help analyze and evaluate a resource that maybe you've provided, or maybe one that a student wanted to check out themselves. So the practice opportunity here would be, as they are kind of getting more familiar with this skill, I would highly recommend as a teacher getting a feel for your class and finding out what are some go-to health resources that students are already using. So what are your students already accessing? And let's model that as a whole class with the teacher using that checklist. Is this a valid resource? What are some reasons? Yes and no. And so we're going to do that for a health resource that's used commonly, one that is considered valid and one that's not, and let students see both sides of the line there. And we're going to model that as a whole class first. And then what I think would be an awesome opportunity for our students to practice is let them read a health article of their own interest. So let them do some research, let them find something that they're passionate about or want to learn more about, and let them read on it. And you can provide some website resources for that. And then they're going to pair up and give the students an opportunity to kind of summarize what they've learned. But then the partnered student is going to ask questions for that student to check to see how valid is this information, and is this information really coming from the article you read, or is this coming from you? There's lots of great questions that students can ask, and we don't want our students to be like Bobby Boucher and the Water Boy. Well, that's what my mama said. Mama said. We don't want that, and so we want them to be able to, when they are communicating, be able to cite that resource, be able to cite why the resource was valid. And so this gives the students an opportunity to kind of use the tools that they've learned so far within this skill. And then
I could hear it. I could hear him saying that quote. Yeah, that's great.
Step 3, all about locating and finding. And I think as a teacher, we can really help here. I've really stressed to Springfield teachers that if we have community and site resources, those should be embedded within our instruction and our learning management system. So we're a Canvas user. If our counseling support Google Forms are not located within our health Canvas courses, then we're not doing our job as health teachers, because those resources should be readily available within our health information. And so we can model that here within this step, making it easy for students to access. And I think just a fun practice opportunity would be for them to go back and look in their journals throughout this skill so far. What questions did they have? And let's give students an opportunity to go research and answer some of the questions that they had earlier in the skill, earlier in the unit. And so this is not a big fancy activity, but I think if we can allow students time to find out what questions have they had so far related to their health, and then let's give them time to go research and find answers to those questions, especially now that they've learned what is a valid resource, and how do I make sure it's valid. And so just some opportunities for students to use those skills. Kim, is there anything that you would like me to elaborate more on in those 3 steps before we move to the training guide?
No, I love it. One ad is just kind of piggyback on this last step of reflecting and letting them journal and go back and reflect on their learning. I think that's one step of any teaching practice that I think we leave out, and it takes time, and time is so valuable in the curriculum planning process. But I think this reflection piece for it's so critical to having kids make those connections and reflect on it. And journaling is a beautiful way to get that done. And so I just really encourage teachers to carve that time out for that last step that you just mentioned about reflecting via journaling. I just wanted to say, I think that's there's a lot of power in this last step. So anyway, that's a setup.
And I provided examples for steps 1 through 3. Don't forget there is a step 4 and 5. Did not want to take the time to do every step, but that step 4 and step 5 is reflecting is very important as well.
Yep, definitely. Well, we're going to give you another opportunity here to reflect on your own kind of best practice, since we just got done talking about that. So in your training guide on page 3, we want you to take some time to dig into the teaching progressions for that performance indicator that you had selected and start your instructional planning. What will your steps look like? What will your practice opportunities look like? And then how will you know that your students have mastered those? So get your head around some of these instructional practices, the planning opportunities that you have there for your kids. So take some time, fill out that training guide. And if you are looking for some help filling this section out, the health skill guides that Brad and I are referencing from RMC Health are a fantastic tool to use. And here is a screenshot of one of those, and it shows the So Brad has elaborated on the different steps of this particular standard. And so step 1 is identified here, and then it breaks it down into those sub-skills. And I think you can find some of your to-dos for your students there. It gives them valuable vocabulary. A lot of our curricular planning documents focus on vocabulary. We have to get kids that information right off the bat. It gives some suggested learning activities, and Brad has pulled some of those and shared those with us today. And then the language of health literacy are some of those prompts that sometimes students have a hard time speaking the health language. And so these sentence starters are very powerful. And again, partnering back to the journaling concept, some of these prompts could be posted for students to respond to in their own journal. So this is a screenshot for a 9-12 grade span, but those health skills are in the RMC website, which is also linked there. So as we plan these things, we can't forget where it will fit in our content. And I think, Brad, down in Springfield, you probably hear the same thing as we hear in Columbia, like, wait a minute, as we make this transition, where's my content go? Where my content unit flow looks like this, how can I put this in? Several places. And so if I look at some of our HECAT information that we have, the modules are more content-based and content-focused for the HBOs, or the health behavior outcomes, by content. And so if we look at how could we fit accessing reliable and valid information into a content, I could probably make a justification for any of these content areas. So Brad, do you have one that's super near and dear to your heart that you would put it in?
I mean, I think safety would be one to add, sexual health, and really whatever your students need, right? And so it really, you're probably going to cover all of these if you provide some student choice and allow them to research their interest.
Right. It's a big one. It's a powerful one. So we want you to make some of those same content connections with that performance indicator that you have been working with through your training guide today. And so if you access the HECAT modules, make your connections, reflect those there on page 3 in your training guide, and you'll kind of come full circle, marrying content with this skills-based health education. So we appreciate you joining us today, focusing on Standard 3. We encourage you to join us again. We have some series out there with our whole skills-based health. We have a why session, the overall why. We have making that shift session, and we will have some instructional strategy videos there. And then we are in the diving into the national health standards, and we are there at the red arrow today, accessing valid and reliable resources. And we hope you join us for any or all of these sessions that you see listed. And Brad, thank you for your energy and your knowledge today, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye, everybody.
See ya.